Sech the Shabbos, Parachav Beis, Mishnah Aleph. Chavis shenishbara matzilin hemen amazon shalosh sudas va'omer la'acherim boy v'atzil lachem u'v'vad shelo yisbay. What are we talking about here? The Chachamim were geyser that if a barrel of liquid such as wine, oil, or honey broke and the contents are going to get wasted, one may save it only with a limited amount. So if a barrel of food broke, you may save it with only enough food for 3 Shabbos meals. Mazon shalosh sudas. The Chachamim forbade the owner to save more than this amount because they were concerned that as he rushes to obtain empty containers to collect the food, he might carry the containers in a Rishus Rabbim. But by limiting the amount he may carry, the Chachamim made it less likely that he'll be over on Hoitzah. The Chachamim said he may also say to others, come and save food for yourself. He may invite other people to save food from the broken barrel. And the Chachamim also regards that saving liquids for 3 meals is mutter only if one does not use a sponge to soak it up. One may not use a sponge because one might squeeze the liquid out of it, which is also on Shabbos. Any seichtin it's a pairs like tzimei mashkin. You may not squeeze fruits on Shabbos in order to extract juice from them, because that's a form of dash, threshing. More than that, even if the juice came out of the fruit by itself on Shabbos, the Chachamim were geyser that one may not drink it because we're concerned that drinking the juice might lead for one to squeeze the fruit in order to extract more juice. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the fruit was intended as food, meaning the owner stored the fruit in order to eat it, that which drips out is going to be mutter. But if the fruit was intended to drink, meaning he bought these fruits in order to squeeze and drink the juice, that which drips out is usher. Although the Chachamim were concerned that one might squeeze out more juice on Shabbos, that concern applies only where the owner originally intended to use the fruits for that purpose. If he intended to eat the fruit, he presumably wants the remaining juice to stay in the fruit, and there is a little risk that he will extract more juice. According to the Tanna Kama, however, one may never drink juice that oozes out of a fruit on Shabbos, regardless of the purpose of the fruit. The machlekes is limited to fruits that are occasionally squeezed for their juice. For fruits that are usually squeezed, Rabbi Yehuda agrees one may not drink juice that leaked out of them on Shabbos, even if one intended to eat them, since the common use of these fruits is for juice. The Mishnah continues, Chalas dvash riskan me'erev Shabbos, just as it's forbidden to drink juice that oozed out of fruit, so too it's forbidden to eat honey that oozed out of a honeycomb. The Mishnah is going to bring a machlekes as to whether this issur includes even honey that flows out of the honeycomb that was crushed before Shabbos. So chalas dvash riskan me'erev Shabbos, if one crushed honeycombs before Shabbos, and the honey flowed out by itself on Shabbos, the Chachamim were geyser that the honey is also to be eaten on Shabbos, because it might lead to actively extracting more honey. Rabbi Lezer permits such honey because one is unlikely to extract more. Since the honey is in a crushed honeycomb, which will come up by itself, people generally do not bother to actively extract it. The Tanna Kama, however, asks even the honey of a crushed honeycomb, because according to him, the Chachamim were concerned that if this honey was mutter, people might go and take out more honey from the honeycomb that's not crushed. This machlekes applies to the juice of crushed fruit as well. Rabbi Lezer permits the juice because the fruit's already crushed and the more juice will come out by itself, while the Tanna Kama holds it's usher, because if such juice is mutter, people might extract juice from fruit that's not crushed. Mishnah Gimel. Mishnah Beis. Kol sheba bechamin me'erev Shabbos, anything that was cooked in hot water before Shabbos, shayru naisa bechamin b'Shabbos, may be soaked in hot water on Shabbos, even though soaking food in hot water is a form of cooking, and is normally usher on Shabbos. In this case, where the food was already cooked, soaking it is mutter. This is an application of the rule of ein bishul achar bishul, which means that once food has been cooked, there's no issur deraisa against cooking it again. The Chachamim, however, were geyser that even cooked food may not be placed in a pot of hot water that's still on the fire. The Mishnah over here which is matir soaking cooked food in hot water, means that one may place it in the pot after it had been removed from the fire. This halach of ein bishul achar bishul is limited to dry food. If a liquid or a moist solid was cooked and then cooled down, it's no longer considered to be cooked. So cooking it a second time is going to be usher because it's not considered mavushal anymore. Hence, in the Mishnah's case, if the cooked food was a liquid or a moist solid and it cooled down, one would not be allowed to soak it in hot water on Shabbos. But anything that was not cooked in hot water before Shabbos, may only be rinsed in hot water on Shabbos, which means that one may pour hot water over it, but one may not soak it in hot water. Since this food is still uncooked, soaking it in hot water, which is a form of cooking, is usher. Nevertheless, one is allowed to pour hot water over it because it's not considered cooking. The Mishnah is matir pouring hot water onto uncooked food only if the water is poured from a klisheni. The pot in which the water was heated on the fire is called the klirishin, which is the primary keli, and the keli into which the hot water is poured from, the klirishin, is called the klisheni, the secondary vessel. The halacha is that a klirishin can cook food, but a klisheni can only warm up food and not cook it. So, as we explained in Parag Gimel, so one may pour water from a klisheni onto the uncooked food, because doing so doesn't render the food cooked. But pouring hot water from a klirishin is usher, even though the water is no longer inside the klirishin when it comes into contact with the food, because it still cooks the food to a limited extent. Furthermore, even though a klisheni cannot cook, the Mishnah is matir only pouring hot water onto uncooked food from a klisheni. It's also to soak the food in hot water in a klisheni, because though it's not called cooking, it looks like it's cooking. Chutz min hamaliach hayoshan, it's mutter to rinse uncooked food in hot water. That applies to all foods except old salted fish that was salted at least a year before. I guess they had a really salty, smelly fish. V'dagam luchum ketanim, and small salted fish. V'kul yaso espanan, and a Spanish sole, which is a type of fish. And this fish has very thin skin, so if you pour the water on, it'll cook right away. And this is because the rinsing is a completion of the preparation. In the case of these fish, merely rinsing them in hot water is enough to make them edible. Therefore, even rinsing them is not allowed. One may not pour water even from a klisheni onto these foods. Mishnah Gimel. Shover Adam esachaves lechel himena gregors. A person may break open a cask of dried figs in order to eat figs from it, provided that he does not intend to make a keli. That is, one may cut a rough hole in the cask, because that's a destructive act, which is makalkel, which is not considered a malacha. However, they are also by midrabanon, unless they are done for the sake of Shabbos, as in the Mishnah's case, where one breaks a barrel in order to eat the figs inside. One may not, however, produce a proper neat opening, since he creates a keli which is going to be aser. It's going to be magab patish. We may not make a hole in the stopper of a cask, because thus one makes the vessel by creating an opening in it. Again, which would be magab patish. The Rabbi Yehuda. As they talk, Rabbi Yehuda, the Chacham are matir making a hole in the stopper, because it's unusual to make such a hole. One who wants to make an opening in the top of a barrel would simply remove the stopper rather than make a hole in it. So making a hole cannot be viewed as a step in the vessel's production. And removing the entire stopper is mutter and Shabbos, even though that act makes an opening, since the stopper was intended from the start to be detached. So it's not truly part of the cask. Removing it, therefore, is not regarded as creating a hole in the cask, but as uncovering a hole that had already existed. They agree, however, the Chachamim are matter only making a hole in the top of the stopper, but not on the side. They agree that one may not make a hole in the inside, because making a hole in the stopper side is a standard procedure of boina and or magab patish. If there was a hole in it that one wishes to seal, one should not put wax over the hole, because in the process of doing so, one smooths out the wax, which is usher because of memachek, smoothing. Rabbi Yehuda said, a case in which someone sealed the hole with wax on Shabbos was presented to Rabbi Yechon Mezaki in Arav. What is Arav exactly? It's the name of a place. And he said, I fear that he may be mechuyev to bring a chatas. So though smoothing wax is memachek, is also midaraisa, Rabbi Yechon Mezaki didn't rule that the person was vaday chayv chatas, because it was unclear whether they smoothed out the wax or just placed it on the hole without smoothing it. So that's why he didn't say it was vaday chatas, but chances are he's going to be chayv chatas. Zogt the Mishnah Vayter Mishnah Dalet. You may place a pot of cooked food into a cool pit so be protected from spoiling in the daytime heat. This is allowed despite the possibility that one might smooth out the floor of the pit, which would be a malacha, similar to mamachek, b'mashra gumes, which would be makah patish. We may place a pitcher of warm, drinkable water into a pool of cold, bad, undrinkable water, so that the drinkable water cools down. And we may place cool water in the sun so it will become warm. The second case over here of putting drinkable water into undrinkable water does not involve any malacha at all. The Mishnah only mentions this because of the connection to the next halacha, that is that you're allowed to do, because the malacha of cooking applies only when you're using something from a fire, not when someone uses the heat of the sun. However, there is makom to be chayshish that if one is allowed to heat water under the sun, one might think it's mutter to use any source of heat That's not actual fire, and he may come to heat water by burying it in hot ash, which has been heated by the fire, which can lead to being chayse b'gechalim, which can lead to other gzeros and chashashas about making a fire. Misha nashru kelev b'derech b'mayim mahalach ben chayshsh. One whose outer clothes fell into the water while he was traveling may continue to walk in them even though they are wet, and doesn't have to be concerned that onlookers may think that he washed them on Shabbos. It's also to clean your clothes on Shabbos because of malabe. If it was raining, one certainly doesn't need to be concerned because everyone else sees it. Everyone else is getting wet also. The Mishnah teaches that even when the source of the wetness is not obvious, he's still allowed to wear wet clothes in public. Now the question is, why would a person be traveling? So if you look in the beginning of Siman Shin Aleph and Shulchan Aruch, Torah and Shulchan Aruch discusses that a person is allowed to cross over a river on Shabbos in order to get to the other side to check out his parnasa, and it's considered l'dvar mitzvah. So he's traveling for a dvar mitzvah on Shabbos. It doesn't mean that he's able to be mechal Shabbos. It just means that there's certain drabonot or certain chumras that he doesn't have to keep. However, once he enters the town and arrives at the outermost chatra of the town, where it's safe to leave his clothing, he may no longer wear them. Rather, he must spread them out in the sun to dry. This is not permitted in front of other people. One who spreads out wet clothing to dry must indeed be concerned that people suspect him of having washed them on Shabbos. Therefore, it's also to do it in public. The halacha does not follow this Mishnah. The halacha is that any act which is also because of maras ayin may not be done even in private. So it's going to be also to hang clothing out to dry, even in a place where they will not be seen. So this is a case of maras ayin, and this is brought down over there together in Shulchan Aruch. I believe it's either the end of Shin Aleph or the beginning of Shin Beis. One who bathes in the water of a cave, which is water heated by a man, or in the waters of Tveria, any spring that's naturally hot. The reason why you're not allowed to bathe yourself in hot water on Shabbos is because the Rabbanan were geyser that even if the water was heated before Shabbos, the bathhouse workers would heat water on Shabbos and claim they heated it the day before. Later, the Chacham asked bathing even the waters of a hot spring, which is naturally heated. However, when they saw it was difficult for people to completely refrain from bathing in hot water on Shabbos, they were matter bathing in hot springs. So the Mishnah refers to both bathing in water heated by fire, which is asur, and bathing in a hot spring, which is mutter. Since the Mishnah discusses even bathing, which is asur, it uses the term harechetz, one who bathes, rather than rechetz, and we may bathe, because there's some that are mutter and there's some that are asur. And he dried himself even with 10 towels, one after the other. He may not carry them home in his hand because he might squeeze the water out of them. This is also even though he used 10 towels and the last ones are barely wet. Squeezing water out of a towel is also on Shabbos. It is mutter, however, to dry one's body with a towel, even though the concern exists, one might squeeze it out. Had even drying oneself been asur, people are not washed on Shabbos as they would not want to wash without drying themselves. So the Chachamim wanted to avoid making a halacha that would prevent people from bathing on Shabbos altogether. Because I guess there are times when people have to be tovel on Shabbos, people have to wash themselves, people have to wash their hands, wash their faces on Shabbos, and they didn't want to asur washing all across the board. However, 10 people may dry their faces, hands, and feet. They may even dry their entire body. The Mishnah mentions face, hands, and feet, that this was normally what the communal towels were used for. And with Vinais and Biyadan, meaning they could dry off their bodies with one towel, and they may carry it in their hands. When several people are together, they remind each other not to be Mechal Shabbos. Therefore, even if 10 people use a single towel, so it's very wet, we're not concerned that the one who carries it will squeeze it, because the others will remind him not to. In fact, even if only 2 people are present, one of them is allowed to carry it home, because the other will remind him not to squeeze it. Mishnah Vav. Sachin u'mamashmashin b'vnei me'ayim. We may anoint, apply oil, and massage the stomach on Shabbos for pleasure, but not for healing purposes. Some Girsoi, so the Mishnah, do not include the words b'nei me'ayim, and the Mishnah is referring to all parts of the body. Avaloi mis-amlin, v'loi mis-garden. However, one may not massage the body vigorously or scrape the skin, even for pleasure, because these are considered weekday activities. One who suffers from a pain or ailment, but is not sick, that he will stay in bed, is asur b'drabanan to take medicine or to engage in other therapies. Even one who anoints and massages his body for pleasure must do so in an unusual manner, because otherwise they would be forbidden as an ovdei decha. I could rather think, I remember hearing, although it would be interesting to know what the tzaddim are, what the halacha l'maisa is, we're just going through the Mishnayos over here, but the Reb Shlomo Belsky held that taking Tylenol is mutter on Shabbos, it's not an issue because it's so normal. It's almost not like medicine or something along those lines. Ein Jordan le Kordima. You may not go to Kordima, which is or Fulima. Some have the gears to hear Pulima, which was, I'm going to read the Rav, is a Bikam Elei Amayim. It was a valley full of water, and had very thick and gooey mud on the bottom. Some type of quicksand that was there, and you're not allowed to go down there on Shabbos. Or it's very slippery, and another pshat is that it's very slippery, and the one who goes to bathe there might fall, soak his clothes, and then squeeze them out, which is also on Shabbos. So it's best if you stay away from this altogether. The ein oisen apiktivazen, and we may not take a potion that induces vomiting because this resembles healing. The restriction is limited to drinking a liquid that induces vomiting. It's mutter to make oneself vomit by placing a finger in the back of one's mouth. Or one may even drink this kind of potion if he has stomach pain that would be eased if he throws up. You may not make it on Shabbos. You may not straighten the bones or the spinal vertebrae of an infant because doing so gives the appearance of baina. Sometimes the bones or the spinal vertebrae of an infant are a bit misaligned, or may not realign them on Shabbos because doing so resembles building. This restriction applies only after the day of birth. On the day of birth itself, one may violate any drabonon for the sake of the infant, including realigning the bones. Ve'ein machzirin as a shever, we may not set a broken bone because it's an act of healing. The halacha does not accord with this Mishnah. In fact, it's mutter to set a broken bone on Shabbos, because if this is not done immediately, the entire limb could be endangered. And halacha commissioner zu, halacha machzirin as a shever b'Shabbos. Misha nifrika yoda v'ragla, one whose hand or foot became dislocated, leads from betzayin, and you may not rub them vigorously with cold water because it's clear that he's doing so for the purposes of healing. However, he may wash himself in his usual manner, and if he's thereby healed, he is healed. That is, he may wash his entire body, including the dislocated joint, even though the joint might be healed by doing that. Since he's cleaning his entire body, he doesn't appear to be engaging in an act of healing. The Itzid Rabbanon against the acts of healing on Shabbos apply only where it's clear that the act is intended for refuah.